Welcome, everybody, and glad that you're here. We are recording this for posting on YouTube later, so just be aware if you do not want your picture on, go ahead. You obviously don't have to speak or anything either. This is entirely, your level of participation is entirely up to you, although this is going to be a little bit different Death Salon from previous ones because we are going to be encouraging a more active discussion between all of us here today. And again, yeah, you don't necessarily need to speak to participate. You can also throw questions or comments in the chat and we can, take it from there as well. And to begin, I was just going to take us through a quick breathing exercise to get us all into alignment and on the same page. And that's just going to be a little bit, a little alternate nostril breathing. If you were not familiar with this, it involves placing your thumb on one nostril and another finger on the other, and we're going to breathe in. I'll just demo it real quick. So breathing in through my right nostril, closing, opening the left, breathing out, breathing in through the left, closing, breathing out through the right. So that's the general gist of it. Have your right nostril open and I will guide us through this. No breathing out and breathe in through your right nostril. Switch, breathe out through the left. Breathe in through the left. Switch, breathe out through the right. Breathe in through the right. Switch, breathe out through the left. Breathe in. Switch, breathe out. Breathe in. Switch, breathe out. Breathe in. Switch, breathe out. And go back to breathing normally. Thank you for being here. In addition to sort of getting us grounded and centered, that's good for relieving anxiety too. You can always have your breath to go to. Before we get in to the main event here, well, actually, we are here to talk about fear of death anxiety, what scares you, how to deal with it, and that sort of thing. We've invited a couple of our board members to talk first. We're going to start with Rabbi Rick Brody, our chairperson. And Rick, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. This is my first Death Salon, and I hope to participate in more of them going forward. I'm very proud to be the chair of the founding board of the directors of the Virtual Death Doula Network, and really love what Daniel and Andrea are doing, and hope to support their efforts, and for us to just all be working together to advance the conversation about death. Whatever expertise or experience each of us brings, whether it's the work that we do or perspectives that we have, there's I think always something to learn and for us to grow, either for ourselves or for how we work with others who are facing death and the anxieties and fears connected to it. Tiny bit about me. I am a rabbi. I work as a chaplain. I'm the community chaplain for the Jewish community of the greater Denver area, working with Jewish Family Service of Colorado. And my primary function is to show up and provide spiritual pastoral care as a chaplain does, to anyone who's Jewish who isn't connected to a rabbi of their own, which basically means those who aren't members of a congregation. So I'm meeting people who have potentially been disconnected or on the fringes of Jewish life for any amount of time. There could be a wide range of backgrounds that and experiences that people bring. And I am called often to hospice situations or otherwise end-of-life situations to sit at the bedside of somebody whose death is imminent. Sometimes I'm brought in to meet with someone who's in hospice care or moving in that direction, to have a less rushed conversation in terms of getting to know them and helping guide them towards acceptance and emotional and spiritual preparation for their death. That, I think, leads right into the topic. I'll say that in terms of my own experience, there is a range. Sometimes when I arrive, I learn from family members or sometimes from the individual themselves, if they're still cognizant and coherent and able to engage in conversation. I will often learn that they have come to a place of acceptance and are ready to die without fear. And I'm always curious to learn, how did they get there? I did a funeral recently, actually had sat at the bedside of the woman who died, but she was not conscious at that visit. So I never got the chance to talk with her directly. But when I was preparing for her funeral with her loved ones, they talked about, she got her cancer diagnosis and it was really bad. And she did have fear and anxiety, and she worked through it and came to a place of acceptance and no longer had fear. And I asked, how did she get there? What was the path of that transition? And there was no secret formula, no magic recipe. They said that she was just someone in her life who always met adversity and knew that the only way through is through, and to be present with the realities that life was throwing at her and to persevere. There's certainly plenty of literature out there, whether it's the very highly regarded work of Viktor Frankl, who talks about his experience in death camps of Nazi Germany, surviving that and witnessing that, among other survivors, a commitment to persevere and a belief in the goodness of life, the possibilities of life, was something that people were able to lean on, to see themselves through out of the darkness. So many will talk about some kind of faith or some kind of spiritual grounding. The labels for that frame of mind can certainly vary, but there is a lot of talk about doing that, we'll just call it spiritual preparation, for showing up for life is one way to be able to meet death with some sense of acceptance and maybe less fear or anxiety. That's just sort of some general thoughts. I do sometimes meet with people who are feeling fear, and often that is their concerns for the people whom they're going to be leaving behind, and who's going to take care of them. What's going to happen when I'm not there anymore? That's, I think, a big piece for a lot of people. And then, of course, sort of elephant in the room is the fear of the unknown, of, well, what happens to me after I die? What will be my experience of my death after my body dies? And I think there's a conversation to be had about what answers or what possibilities become part of the conversation, and how does that relate to confronting fear. My general approach from a pastoral perspective as a chaplain, in which my purpose is really to meet people where they are and to honor their feelings and guide them to where their spirit is leading them in terms of how to feel and how to confront their reality, and to just, for me, to just give empathy to them as a companion with them in the process. That doesn't necessarily involve, ideally, it doesn't involve my giving an answer for what they should believe. Judaism doesn't place much emphasis on what happens after we die. We tend to be agnostic about that question. We say we don't know, and therefore our focus is on making the most meaning out of our lived experience. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But before I do, the other thing that I do want to really emphasize is that for the fears or anxieties that might be connected to what's going to be happening among the living after I die, so separate from the what's going to happen to me in whatever the journey of my soul might be, but what are the more practical realities? The best way to quell that anxiety is for folks to talk about death, exactly like we're doing now, to not stigmatize conversations about death, to be open about it in general. B, and there's probably more, but I think I'll end with B, is to do the logistical planning related to your death and the death of your loved ones before you have to, before there's a diagnosis, before someone is told that they only have X amount of time left to live, and certainly before something totally unexpected happens. So whether that's, figuring out what's going to happen to your body. Are you going to work with a mortuary, a cemetery, cremation, green, all kinds of options are out there. Are you going to choose a particular religious setting for the rituals that might be connected to your death? Those are critical to have worked out in advance, because, and this I can definitely say that I see, is the anxiety among the mourners, the survivors after someone has died, is so much higher when they haven't made those plans yet. When I work with families who they say, oh yes, we have everything worked out, we've called the mortuary, they've pulled up our file because we had made all those arrangements years ago or whatever, that just puts them in a much more calm state, with just that feeling of the wishes are being met, they were considered and they were decided and communicated, and there are professionals who do this work well, who are going to take care of me in the process. So I cannot stress enough the importance of people looking into those questions and decisions and making those plans in advance. The last thing I want to do, and I believe I have screen sharing. No, I don't. I don't know if that can change. Let's see. Looks like I've got it now, maybe. Okay. I'm going to just share a couple of things that I just found when I did a quick Google search about Judaism and fear of death. There's a paper. I would love to read it. Here's the abstract. They're looking at the relationship between religious afterlife belief and fear of death in a Jewish population. So one might say that a firm belief in an afterlife could be a buffer for death anxiety, and that those who maybe have more orthodox beliefs ought to indicate lower rates of death anxiety than those who do not have strongly held afterlife beliefs. These social scientists did a wide-ranging survey of attitudes and experiences with death, and they show that specific beliefs, intensity of belief, and orthodoxy of held beliefs play no significant role in the self-reported level of death anxiety in a Jewish population, which is fascinating. I'd love to learn more. It seems to suggest that there's other stuff that one needs to do. Maybe it's that B that I just mentioned before, or maybe A as well. People might have strong beliefs about an afterlife, but maybe they're not talking about it. So that was A that I mentioned before. Maybe there's still more need to talk about it in order to break through that anxiety. And then B, maybe they have those beliefs, but they haven't made the plans. And then when they start thinking about the logistical details related to their death, maybe then their anxiety comes up. Or maybe it's just the way people are wired and different personalities, and maybe there's nothing to do about it, except perhaps that those of us who work with and care for those who are facing death, that we show up with our empathy and with our compassion, and perhaps that's the best that we can do for people who are just maybe more hardwired or prone to have these anxieties completely separate from whatever their beliefs are. I certainly don't have any answers, but I thought that that was fascinating. And then this is a little summary of a podcast. I haven't heard the podcast, but what it says here is they're talking about a section from the Torah that they see as a celebration of life over death, specifically how the sacred seasons of the Hebrew calendar present us with an opportunity to rise above the banality of the human condition and constantly renew our lives with meaning and divine purpose. And I really like that idea because it comes back to the Jewish focus on we don't have answers about what happens after we die. We want to focus on renewing our lives with meaning and divine purpose while we're alive, and particularly tapping into the rhythms of a religious calendar to amplify that. And so whatever tools are available to people, what gives your life meaning, what rituals, what commitments are out there that can help you in that regard, I think that is potentially a meaningful antidote, helpful antidote to the question of confronting the anxieties related to death and fear of death. So those are some of my thoughts for the morning. I look forward to being in conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. That was amazing. It was great to hear all of that. Yeah, that's a great way to start this death salon. I really appreciate it. That's we will have you back again to talk more. Jenna, would you like to talk now? Jenna's also on our board. She's the treasurer, and I'll let her have a little chat with you now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm Jenna. A little bit about me. I was a therapist for 15 years, and I recently have transitioned over into the coaching world. I'm now a wellness and psychedelic integration coach. But during my 15 years, I came across and helped several people with anxieties about a lot of things, and a lot of them were death. And from that point of view, helping people, sorry, of course my boys are waking up and moving around upstairs. There they go. Okay, I just want to make sure they're not gonna come in here and what are you talking about? Anyway, from the perspective of a therapist helping folks, I came at it from, well, I'm trained in dialectical behavior therapy, and that comes from a very logical type treatment place. And when you look at debt, like fear and anxiety, it talks about what justifies an emotion, and fear and anxiety are justified by a threat to your well-being. And obviously death is like the ultimate threat to your well-being, it being alive, right? Like that is a justifiable. So if anything, that's like the main thing that justifies an anxiety response is the possibility of death. So how do you help someone when their fear is justified? And Rick, you talked about it. One of the biggest things is problem solving, right? And so that, now coming from more of a personal space, I've worked through my fears along the way, and really went into some deep dive work around death and my views and how I process and my own anxiety and fears about it when my mom died. That was a big process. And for me, what's remaining still is my fears around my children and how, like you said, Rick, exactly, like I don't have a lot of fear myself. I was just talking about it with my husband last night in preparation with this, and we were both talking about like he called it the great mystery. I finally get the answer to the great mystery, right? And it's almost like an exciting place. And when you reframe that for yourself of like, I'm okay to die because I'm excited. I get to find out this whole, like the main question that a lot of us, have is in existence. I'm like, yeah, that's how I feel about it. However, the fears come in when it's like, what happens with my boys, right? How will they be? Will they be okay? And so going back to my training, you problem solve. When there's a justified emotion, you problem solve. So that's one of the things that I think people don't want to talk about it. So it's great that we're talking about it and getting more and more people to talk about it and be able to have those spaces. And for me personally, there's some helplessness here. My boys have a father who is very non-existent, but has, what happens? I don't have the money to fight him and get him out of the picture so that my husband would have custody of my boys. Like, absolutely, I don't know if that is even feasible and what that would take. And so there's like this helpless fear around that of what do I even do? So that's where my anxieties continue to lay, is how do you problem solve when there's not a lot of good solutions, or at least I don't know the solutions right now. So that's part of what I would like to bring the conversation to, is having some discussion. And how do you sit with somebody who has like that helplessness around the problem solving aspect of things? And so that was one of the things I wanted to bring. But overall, I love this conversation. I think that the biggest thing is to be able to talk about it more, because how do you problem solve when you don't address the problem to begin with? So that was mine, not as long as yours, Rick. Didn't have quite as much to say, but that is kind of where I come at with my fears and anxieties personally. And again, just kind of bouncing off what you said, Rick, there's so many people that are able to get to that place of peace themselves after the initial, like, oh shit, like, diagnosis and getting to their own acceptance part. But then it's letting go of the control, I guess, of making sure that your people are okay. So.
Thank you, Jenna. That was great. And please thank your husband, because absolutely love the framing of you get to finally find out the answer to the great mystery. That actually, that feels exciting. So thank you for that. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that was great. Thank you for contributing to the conversation. And now it's my turn to talk a little bit about my experience with fear of death and where I fall down on that. I I was terrified of death for a long time, for like most of my adult life. Like I remember I was struggling with the whole just idea of God and soul and an afterlife way back in when I was in high school. And my mother died right around that time, and I went off to school, and I was just like, okay, I'm done with this. It didn't make sense to me the way I was taught about religion. I was raised in sort of like a congregational, like traditional Protestant New England type thing, and the way that it was put forward to me just didn't make sense. So I just kicked the whole thing to the curb and said, I'm going to do this without any of that. And as a result, my belief was that when I died, I just went beep and was done. And that was very uncomfortable to even think about. It was quite unpleasant. Like that was, sort of like the core of existential angst and what happens, and just sort of the belief that I would cease altogether at that point. And it was only in the last few years that I've sort of like come back to a place of spirituality and belief and trust in like a higher power and everything, and I've gotten to the point where I am quite confident in in my own immortal eternal soul that's in there, and that has gone, that's been a tremendous help in like getting over that, as you might expect, like the fact that I have a firm belief that I am immortal at my core, and that I will drop this body at some point, and I will continue in some other form after that. And that's what I love talking about that and sharing that with anybody who wants to listen. And was sort of the impetus for why we want to talk about this, and because it is important to have these conversations, because it's only by having these conversations that you can share and learn and grow and come to everybody has to come to their own, obviously, understanding of how this sort of thing works. And you can do it by yourself, but it's a lot more helpful to have conversations and hear different points of view, and get an understanding of what other people believe and what works for them and whatnot. Because we're all on our own personal journey, but there's some overlap between those personal journeys, and you definitely can learn from others' experiences. Although ultimately you'll need to have the experience yourself. And obviously until I actually die, I won't know for sure, but I'm at the point where whenever that happens, I like to think I'll be looking forward to it. I don't, at some point I may get a terminal diagnosis, and then we'll find out how cool and calm and collected I actually am about this whole dying thing. But I like to think that when that comes, I'll still be on board with ready, being okay with dropping this body and moving on to the next phase of my existence. So thank you for listening to my take. And Andrea, do you want to go now?
I do. Thank you, Daniel. So for me, when I think about death, it isn't the actual moment of death that scares me at all, but it's rather the period of decline that can sometimes accompany death, particularly when there's terminal illness. My father suffered from Parkinson's disease, and watching his decline, particularly as it got worse and worse, was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. Watching my incredibly intelligent, proud father lose his cognition, lose his sense of self, and watching him know that he was losing these pieces, it scared me more than anything ever has. And it is still something that causes feelings of fear and anxiety to well up in my chest. I can literally feel them just rising when I think about it. So in the past, that's something that paralyzed me to even think about it. And I would immediately push it away. Now, though, even though it still makes me uncomfortable to think about that potentially happening to me, it also reminds me how precious this life is and how much living I get to do. And that instills in me a very deep sense of gratitude for this life that I get to live, this very precious existence, even though it is fraught with all of these fears and anxieties. It's a blessing and it's a gift. And this principle is called memento mori. It's a reminder that death is inevitable. It is going to happen. So to live life as fully as one can. And this focus of gratitude and inspiration to live big helps me immensely when these feelings come up and feel really intense, because I don't have the answers for the future. I don't know if I'm going to get Parkinson's and start to lose my grasp of everything I know. And the people that know me know I love my brain. And that is without a doubt the most terrifying concept to me, is that I could be cognizant of losing my cognition. And so, like I said, in order to mitigate that, when those feelings come up, I really move to a place of gratitude for the life I get to live now. And it reminds me not to waste a minute of it. So that's where I am. I still do have that fear, and I work with it, and it's part of humanity, and it's part of my humanity. And it's something that also, instead of trying to push it away so hard, I just accept it and I say, it's okay. It's okay that I'm afraid of this. So thank you very much for listening to me, to Daniel, to Jenna, to Rabbi Rick. We want to encourage you to please go ahead and either unmute yourself and share. You can type things into the chat. We would love to hear your fears, your thoughts. If you have any questions for any of us, we just encourage you to go ahead and either unmute yourself or pop into the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And there's only a handful of us here this morning, so we got plenty of time for everybody to get in and share their 2 cents. I encourage, yeah, like what brought you here today? Why are you here? And I'd love to hear from everybody. I would love to hear from everybody. We'll hear, but again, whoever wants to talk, you don't have to. I will shut up now so you can speak.
Yeah. Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. I had a rather interesting, my first experience with death when I was 6 years old. And we had a family friend who was an older gentleman. His name was Doc. And I don't remember a specific conversation, but I remember him being very friendly and, treating me as an equal, even though I was only, a chattering 6-year-old who didn't know what she was about yet. And one day after school, my father picked me up and he said, Louisa, who is Doc? I'm like, oh, he's a friendly gentleman. He always has a smile on his face. He goes, well, he died. And, he died, apparently had a heart attack and died with a smile on his face. And my gut reaction was, oh, and it felt like he'd gone on vacation. And at that time, I lived in New England and people went to vacation in Florida. So in my mind, he's on vacation in Florida. He's always been on vacation in Florida. And someday I'll be on vacation in Florida with him and other people who have died. So I, that, so I don't have an anxiety about death in itself. I agree with Andrea. It's the suffering before death, with a terminal illness or a long diagnosis that's far more scary and anxiety and causing to me. But death itself, there's something mostly pleasant that happens afterwards. That's my gut feeling, and it always has been. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Louisa. I really appreciate that. The process of dying seems like it could be quite unpleasant. I agree with that, depending upon how that actually goes down. Like there could be some serious discomfort there. And yeah, that's certainly not something that I look forward to either. Although I imagine that if you have, a longer period of discomfort, you'll be even more excited to finally, let go of this body when it's time for that time to pass. But yeah, that's certainly part of, I think that's part of the experience, I suppose. Like, as that is part of the experience. So, and I guess each of us will have our own unique way of going through that. We'll all have our own unique experience of getting sick and dying ultimately, and it'll be uniquely tuned to our growth and what we need to, as we end this life and face whatever is next. So thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Sure, I can go. I think I'll start off by saying that what got me interested in death dueling was last year when my aunt passed away. And I don't believe she had a just death in the sense where a lot of my family didn't want to talk to her about dying because they were just so scared of it. And she didn't really have people to talk to other than like her pastor and my mom or her sister, well, my grandma. And it really angered me how just in denial they were and like refused to talk about it with her. But eventually I was like, okay, let me have some compassion for them because it is a very difficult subject. So they just probably couldn't face it themselves. But at the end of the day, seeing the way she died and how scared of dying she was, it got me intrigued into death dueling because I was like, well, I wish, my aunt had somebody like a death doula that could have helped her in that time, which would have made it much easier for her, not only logistics wise, but just in general about talking about death. And that's how I got here today. And so I guess like my fear of dying, I kind of relate to you, Daniel, in a way. I think I'm you, like however many years back. So I'm 28 years old. I grew up as Catholic, but I don't necessarily identify as Catholic. I do believe in God. And I am, I'd say, spiritual, not necessarily Catholic. And so I do believe there is something after, but I think my fears around death is like, okay, once I get to that moment, is there really something after? Is it just all black, even though I do have these beliefs? And also, to your point, Andrea or Andrea, sorry, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing correctly.
It's Andrea. Thank you.
Andrea, okay. Andrea, the decline as well. My both of my grandpas actually had Alzheimer's, and seeing them completely just not remember me and just like it's like they were in a time warp like 40 years back, which was insane to me. And like you, I love my brain. That really scares me, to get to something like that if that were to happen to me. So I would say those are my fears, but I think something that kind of calms me down as far as the like, what's after and whatnot. I had actually quite a psychedelic experience where my aunt, she brought me to her funeral. And I actually got a moment to speak because at the real funeral, I didn't go up, and I was just really nervous to go up and speak, and I had a lot of guilt around it. And then during the psychedelic experience, I was able to speak, and then she was like, "Okay, here, get in the coffin with me," and I was like, "What?" She's like, "No, like get in, it's gonna be fine." I'm like, "Okay." And then she literally showed me her last moments of death, and it was like I was breathing with her in her last those last moments. And then she like kind of walked me through that like little bit like right before you cross over, and it was a very like calm, peaceful feeling. And then she didn't show me afterwards, so I don't think that's what I was supposed to see. And then she was like, "Hey, look, I'm fine, like it's literally fine." And I think about that moment when I start to get fears around death. And also I think from a scientific perspective as well, that helps calm me down is I think, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, just from what I read, I believe we get like a rush of DMT or something within those last moments, which is supposed to be a really incredible experience and a good one, so to say. So kind of to your point, Lisa, about like it being painful or something horrible, the transition, I think it'd be hard to have a painful transition with a huge rush of DMT in your brain. And so that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you. That's yes, psychedelics are an interesting way of exploring these spaces also, and can be healing with that. Like I was with the work I've done, I actually got to sit with a gentleman who had horrible end of life anxiety, and actually like work with him with some like psilocybin to help ease that for him a little bit. Although it was really quite a modest amount. And really, the more important thing came afterwards when we talked and just sort of talking about acceptance and the fact that there's so many ways that you can approach coming to terms with your own mortality, but they all involve just sort of being open and honest and like sort of a direct approach to it. And that's something that this gentleman hadn't really had the opportunity to do just yet. Like he struggled. It reminded me of me actually back when I was struggling with having any sort of belief in a higher power. That's where he was. And he was very much into the whole, I'm going to live out at the end of it. And it was really more, even though there was some psychedelic stuff involved, it was really more the discussion that it fostered afterwards, and just sort of opening up and making him feeling, giving him space to actually talk about his fears, and so that we could actually start addressing some of them. And yeah, part of it was just sort of acceptance of where he was at with his whole path, because he was like in his 50s and dying of cancer and much younger than he anticipated. So it was a lot more challenging for him than like he was not expecting to be there at that point in his life. And that, coupled with his own just sort of personal beliefs as far as what happened after death, made it that much more complicated and hard for him to work through it. But again, it did provide basically a jumping off point for him to start getting okay with that. And like part of that was just sort of recognizing that discomfort and uncertainty might come up again and again. And when it does, it's just sort of having to go back and accepting the situation again and again. And it's like just a constant practice. And I suppose like part of that, like the sort of this tools and the skills to have that are things that we can develop over our lifetime. Like these are just sort of skills as far as being mindful and being in the moment and everything like that can help deal with these. Although it does, they need to be, it helps to do them on a regular basis to build up the skills so that we can better handle stressful situations when they come. And it's sort of, I mean, I think that like, I think about like I've heard stories as far as like monks and whatnot, and sort of their goal is to be perfectly mindful and in the present moment as they're dying, so that they can be fully present for that actual transition, as opposed to like fighting it or pushing against it and everything like that, which I think is a pretty noble goal. Like I think that would be pretty cool to be like being able to be so okay with whatever is going on with my physical body that when the moment of death actually arrives, I am able to be fully present and aware. Or if that DMT rush comes, because I do, yeah, I think I've read or heard that somewhere else, that you do get a DMT blast as that's happening. But again, being present and welcoming and accepting and being like, okay, this is now I am dying. So that's just that's what this moment is. And I think that it's it's easy to say that here, and I also think that it's worth the practice throughout life, so that might actually be an opportunity when that moment of death actually comes. So anyway, and that wound up being a bit more of a ramble than I anticipated.
A much
Anyway, you got anything to say?
something that's kind of struck me as everybody speaks is really what seems to be the thread that makes things less anxiety producing or fear producing is actually talking about it. I'm thinking about what Rick shared when he shared that study, that it's not simply a belief in something higher than yourself or outside of yourself or God or spirituality that quells that anxiety. Because that study showed that. And Ashley, you mentioned that you have a belief, but you still have some residual fears that, we might just blip out. That really what it is talking about it. That's the common thread that seems to make this a little bit more bearable, because it is the human experience that we are all dealing with, and that it's that commonality. And if we can make it more of a regular conversation, a little less taboo, then it starts to feel a little less angst producing, at least for me, since I've become a doula, and since I talk about death so much, it's become second nature to me, but that wasn't the case before. And to me, this conversation really just reminds me how important a simple conversation is. And so I really want to thank everybody for being part of this conversation and sharing it, because that makes it a little less scary.
I definitely agree with that sentiment. We talk so much about living throughout our lives, and living is just as natural as dying. And so, had like my aunt been able to have that conversation before, like she probably wouldn't have been as scared. So I definitely agree with what you said.
Yeah, I think like for people to just get used to the idea that it is okay to talk about death. It's okay to talk about being afraid of it. It's okay to talk about not being afraid of it. I think sometimes that freaks people out. There's maybe some cultural ideas about how we're supposed to feel about death. And that's a big part of what we as a network strive to do, is to make this conversation a little easier and a little more natural, so that it's not so taboo. It's not so, oh my God, we're talking about death. It's, oh yeah, we're having this conversation about a natural part of existence that we all experience. Life and death are not in opposition of each other necessarily. They're partners.
Yeah. Life is a is a fatal condition. Nobody gets out alive. So we're all in this together.
Yes, and T, we would love to hear what you have to say. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And
yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's hard because when I think about grief, I think about the things that I'm really good at, but what I tend to struggle with the most is realizing this isn't like an individual experience, and that it takes a community to grieve just one person, and how we don't have that language in a lot of our communities for asking for help or accepting help. And so something that I've been trying to work on every day is just, you don't have to wait until you or a family member or loved one is dying to start grieving. There's so much to grieve right now. And a lot of that is accepting help, asking for help. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of being able to like offer support to someone, and how beautiful that feels. And I have to remind myself of that, because there's this idea that like, oh, I'm such a burden, or just this really individualist mindset when it comes to especially the United States. And so I think that's something that we have to work on every day, is just learning how to like accept help and ask help and give help, and know that that is like this beautiful community kind of process. I'm like really inspired by Martin Prechtel, which he has a really beautiful talk on grief and praise, and I can drop it in the chat in a little bit, but he talks about how grieving is like going underwater. And if we don't have someone that's going to pull us out, we're not going to go underwater, which is very smart, actually. Like, I think a lot of anxiety, it's not a trick, but like, if you want it to go away, you actually just have to accept why it's there in the first place. And it's not something to be solved or fixed, that it's something to be held. And so I think that like a lot of these conversations aren't about fixing our anxiety. It's just about like making space and holding it. And that's kind of what anxiety wants. It's just like a little kid, wants to be listened to and held and accepted. Not like that's easy, but if you have like metta or loving kindness meditation, and you just create more space around it, that's what helps me. I'm like, oh man, look at you, you're feeling it. And just kind of being okay with that,
Thank you. And I really want to thank you, because I think that's an important distinction to make about anxiety, that it doesn't have to be fixed. It's not something that's wrong, that it is okay and natural to feel this way. And then if we can accept these feelings and accept that this is here, and hold it and give it space, that is, I think that's really beautiful. And I really appreciate that perspective, because it is, especially in American culture, the idea is to fix something, fix it. And this isn't broken. You know, the process of navigating life and death is not easy, but it's not broken and it's not wrong. So thank you so much, Inti, for bringing that up.
And Rick, I thought I saw your hand go up briefly.
Oh, no, that was applause for what Inti was saying.
Oh, okay.
What Andrea was just affirming,
gotcha.
just really affirming it as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add though, just to elaborate on Andrea's point, to Inti's point, is we probably all know this. I think it's always important to promote it more, is that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the way that we face fear, and courage only exists if we acknowledge our fears. So exactly what everyone else has been saying, that we meet it, we acknowledge it, we give it room to do its thing, and then we persevere, we push through. And I'm actually thinking, sort of being a stereotype here, to go to scripture, to the Psalm verse that is such a common refrain within Jewish and Christian circles when it comes to death, the 23rd Psalm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil or bad, because you are with me. We don't have to unpack all the theological elements there, but what I think is critical is that the psalmist is saying, I will walk through that valley. And I'm not going, you're not going to pluck me away from it. You're not going to remove death and the specter, the shadow of its ominous role that it plays for us emotionally and spiritually. I'm going to walk through it. And ideally, I like to think, well, what does it mean you were with me? I see that as a poetic expression of, I have tools. Like Daniel was saying, like Andrea was saying, what are the tools, community, like Inti was saying, the coping mechanisms that are available. For me, and I encourage people I work with, you know, that's where I find the divine, is through those comforting and supportive mechanisms that exist in human beings, in community, in mindfulness, other inner work that we can do. If that supportive system is there, then ideally I can have the courage to know that I will walk through it, and it won't go away, but it won't be as bad as if I didn't welcome in those tools.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick. And then Jenna, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just some of what Inti was saying brought up a thought. My uncle, my favorite uncle, I mean, love all my uncles, but I had one uncle who was absolutely awesome. He came and visited from California. I'm from Michigan, so every time he came back from California, he stayed at our house. It's my dad's brother. So he was like the cool, awesome uncle that came from California and brought us things and snuck us off to get our eyebrow pierced and stuff. And, you know, he was great. And he got diagnosed with cancer. And it was pretty awful. And he dealt with it for several years and was able to make a visit back home, and was doing really, really great, and like went from being paralyzed to doing great. But anyway, I was on vacation. He had just left his visit before we went to vacation, like 2 days before. And like the second day he was home, he passed in his sleep. And that same day that we found out, because it took him a minute to get a hold of us in the middle of the woods where we are. That same day, one of my good friends got in a car accident the night before, actually. So I found out the same day, but the night before, good friend got in a car accident and his girlfriend died. And I didn't know her that well, but the grief that I felt for her in comparison to my uncle, it was like this, oh my God, shock, like, don't feel like I can handle it, like overwhelming. And then Uncle Marshall was like, we got a party. It's time. We're going to do what he said. We're going to celebrate his life. And he lived like, like we all should. And like that difference. So one of the things that this is bringing up for me is like even having that discussion, like having the discussion and preparing for Uncle Marshall dying prepared me to celebrate. And having the shock of Sheena dying, I was not prepared for, and it was just so overwhelming, and to be able to handle that. So one of the things that I was bringing was the fear, and something that I do bring up with my boys on occasion, and probably need to more after we're talking about this, is to have that preparation for even those shocking types of death that are, a car accident type situation. So I just wanted to reinforce, like, the talking about death needs to happen more and more and more in our society. And I think that it'll help bring about less of this fear and anxiety, no matter what you believe. It's just being able to get to that acceptance point that this is all going to happen for us, I think is important. And just, so I'm loving this. I'm loving that we have these conversations, and there needs to be more. I'm complete. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing that and for sharing a piece of you. I think, again, that's what makes this easier is it's what we've all said is community, but it's that shared humanity. It's that we all do experience this, even though everyone's grief is different, it is common, and it is not a solitary thing. And I think that people often feel so alone in their grief, in their fear of grief, in their fear of talking about grief or talking about death. And that isolation is also what contributes to the fear and anxiety. So thank you for sharing and for creating more openness and more conversation. We are going to wrap up today's conversation. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If anybody else has anything they would like to share, please feel free to go ahead and pop it in the chat now or unmute yourself and go for it. Otherwise, we are always here if you want to talk. We will have a follow-up email for this with resource links and a YouTube link to this entire thing. We look forward to continuing this conversation. What this has showed us is that that's what we need more of, is an ongoing conversation about death and dying and fear and anxiety. So we hope you will join us again to do this. As always, the Virtual Death Doula Network does operate on donations primarily. So there will be a link in the chat as well as in the follow-up email. Thank you everyone for joining us. And if anybody else has anything to say, go for it. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a beautiful day and you live it to the fullest, no matter what you're doing.